Hey folks, welcome to season 2, if you will, of Politics for Parents. This is the first episode released after the election and after a few months off, with a super busy legislative calendar and series of events coming out of Washington and a variety of state houses across the country. Um, and since the election, and definitely in recent weeks, a lot of people have been asking about news sources and journalism and media, and where are some quality sources of information. And of course, having good information and being well informed is such a critical part of participating in democracy. Um, and I thought that would make sense for this first episode is just where to get good information and what is kind of the state of media today. And specifically, a lot of us overlook not just quality media outlets, but a lot of us don't really think about our local media too much and state media in particular. Um, and we're now seeing that your state house and your state legislature and a lot of the jurisdiction they have and the legislative power have matters for parents now more than it has in the past as we see rollbacks in federal programs and a lot of the executive orders coming out of Washington. You've got Doge dismantling a lot of federal agencies, and we're seeing that the states are going to be looking to fill gaps and step up in services where the federal government has reducing their role. So this is a really important time to pay attention to what's happening in your state. Um, and I thought the best person to have on for this is someone who I've worked with before. She's one of the best people I've ever worked with and smartest for sure in this area. And her name is Deb Howlett. She's the executive director for the New Jersey State News Service, the State House News Service. She's also a lecturer at Rutgers University and the University of Pennsylvania in journalism and media. And, I think this is hopefully going to be a really enjoyable interview for you folks, where we talk about the role of media broadly and then specifically what Deb's up to in the State House News Service, why state news is important, what the media landscape in New Jersey in particular looks like. And she's going to give us, her inside scoop on some of the best outlets she's following today, what she's working on, and why, we think state news is so important. Um, and hopefully you find this informative. Hopefully you find a few news sources that you might consider subscribing to. If nothing else, sign up for a few daily newsletters from reputable sources. Spend less time on social media. And if you can, pay a few bucks for a subscription service to an outlet that you value, because that really does matter for quality journalism. So I hope you enjoy this episode, and there will certainly be more to come.
I'm Dr. Stephanie Wilson. I'm a historian, an activist, and the host of the Freedom Over Fascism podcast, where we talk to people who give us insight into the current political moment, inspiration for state and local organizing, and connections with our co-conspirators all across the country. You'll meet rural organizers who focus on electing young and diverse candidates, independent journalists who prioritize democracy over disinformation, and candidates building change at the state and local level. I invite you to join the Freedom Over Fascism community and listen to Freedom Over Fascism wherever you get your podcasts.
Good morning, Deb, and thank you everyone for joining Politics for Parents today. I'm here with Deb Howlett, who is the executive director for the New Jersey State House News Service. And you're also a lecturer at Rutgers and UPenn, and you are a mom as well. So you are a very busy woman, and I'm really appreciative of your time. So thanks for chatting with us today.
Glad to be here, Nicole.
Um, and so I want to talk to you, Deb, because I've known you for so long. And I think when we first worked together, like maybe 15 years ago or something, um, you were at a think tank here in New Jersey, but I also knew of your journalism background. I mean, you were a foreign correspondent. I'm pretty sure you were in some war territories, and now you're here in New Jersey focused on the State House. So I'd love to just hear from you about your background and your journey and kind of where you are today.
Oh, sure. Glad to share it. Well, I started out as a state government reporter in Oregon, where I grew up and went to college, and then was hired away from that job to USA Today, where I worked for more than 17 years. First as a national reporter, and then a political reporter, and then the Midwest bureau chief. While I was the Midwest bureau chief, one of the deals I cut was that I would be able to go overseas and cover conflict. So whenever we didn't have an extensive foreign operation. So a lot of it was whoever wanted to stand up and go cover what was going on went. So I've been to a bunch of different places: Haiti, Rwanda, um, Serbia, Iraq, all the garden spots. And my last overseas assignment was immediately after September 11th. Um, I went to Afghanistan. I was one of the first reporters in Afghanistan. Um, and I was there when on October 6th, which is the day that the US started bombing in Afghanistan, and I was in the far north. I wasn't in Kabul, but it was a pretty hairy experience to get there and to stay there. And I was there for pretty much the next 4 weeks, covering what was going on. So, interestingly enough, that was the last trip I took because I ended up having kids. My partner was pregnant at the time, and so I just decided reporting on in war zones wasn't really tenable if I was going to have children. So once I made that decision, my partner Cindy is from New Jersey, and we decided that it would be nice to raise our family around other family. Her brother has the same number of kids and same ages as us. Her sister has one who's a little younger. So we moved to New Jersey, and I went to work for the Star Ledger and went back to covering state government and politics for the Ledger, which I thoroughly enjoyed. And I did that until the bottom fell out of the newspaper industry, and I got bought out. And then that's how we met, was at New Jersey Policy
Yeah.
Perspective, which was a lot of fun. So I've done a lot since then, but mostly centered around teaching journalism and digital media.
Well, it's just such an impressive background, and I feel like I crossed paths lately with so many great journalists doing important work in our communities and our state or at the hyper local level. Here in Red Bank, we've got a great local outlet with a great reporter who also has a storied career. And through the shifts in the industry, has found himself covering, the town he lives in. Um, so I guess, I mean, obviously, what's happened to the industry. Um, Sucks. And of course, I think it really has significant ramifications for our democracy, which a lot of people are wrestling with now. So I'd love to talk to you a little bit about that because you've been in the industry for a long time. You've seen a lot of different shifts. You yourself have been, kind of impacted by the way the media landscape has changed. Um, and I'd love for you to talk a little bit just about like the role that you see media playing in democracy, given a lot of what you've experienced. And especially, last week we saw the AP kicked out of the White House, which I think is, I don't know, scary. Like, I don't even know what the term is for it, scary, insane, whatever. So I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts a little bit, I guess, from a macro level. And then we can kind of dive into New Jersey and state journalism.
Sure, I'm glad to talk about it. So I come from a point of view where a free press is foundational to a thriving democracy. There's just no other way around it. That's how the people who are elected to represent us are held accountable. And as much as they represent the people, so does the press. And I think the press is probably has more of a vested interest in representing those people in legislative districts or where they are. But beyond that sort of philosophical fundamental foundation of a free press is, I think the example you used of the AP being kicked out of the press pool at the White House because they refused in their style guide to change Gulf of Mexico to Gulf of America. Uh, is just sort of A, it's ridiculous, but B, it also shows how critical it is for politicians who want to have total authority to control the press. And that control is what allows them to get away with all of the things that they want to do that a majority of the people might not agree with. And it would seem like, renaming the Gulf of Mexico, which has been the Gulf of Mexico for the last 475 years since the colonists discovered it, is a small thing. It's sort of silly, but it really is representative of a larger issue, I think, that's going on in the current administration and to some extent in previous administrations. But the press, a free and unfettered press is really what we're after, and the politicians now are finding every way they can to shut down that unfettered part of the free press.
Yeah, and I mean, it's funny because sometimes I wrestle with like these discussions in politics or parents, like, okay, how far do we go into this philosophical type realm? And, it's talking about democracy at this like 30,000 foot level. But at the end of the day, I mean, I can't tell you how many times over the past few months, maybe the past couple weeks, friends and family have come to me and said, well, what do you read? How do you get information anymore? Because I don't know who to trust. I don't know where to turn. It seems like everyone's got a bias, or, at every turn, there's a major media company settling with the Trump
Mhm.
administration. And then you're on social media. And I can't tell you how many times loved ones have sent me things that they've seen on Facebook. And I have to say, please, please, like unfollow that source or whoever sent you that. Um, so, like, I guess talk about it a little bit more in terms of, what you're seeing or what you feel are some of the ways politicians are, kind of influencing the media. Because I, it's weird because we're in a place where I feel like so many people talk about like the Gulf of Mexico, or as I like to call it, the Gulf of cheap egg prices. Um, like it's silly. And then there's this whole conversation of, oh, well, they're trying to distract you with this crazy stuff, so you're not paying attention to this like horrific budget, right? The House
Right.
Republicans have introduced. But at the same time, like I feel like you actually can't let it go unchecked. So, like, how do you think about that? And are there any other examples that people are kind of missing when we talk about these crazy national headlines?
So, well, I think one of the strategies that's happening now in Washington, in the Trump administration, is just to create chaos. Uh, I think by creating chaos, nobody can focus on one thing. So they focus on a bunch of disparate things. And some of the things are easier to focus on than others. So the price of eggs, the name of the Gulf of Mexico, whatever that day's sort of silliness is. And that distracts from the larger issue. And the larger issue right now is that Donald Trump is allowing Elon Musk, an unelected, um, uh, unvetted um, person, to come in and basically rip apart the federal government. And that's the main issue that doesn't get addressed when all the other stuff comes up. There's a story going around about they went the Doge guys, and I was listening to Kara Swisher podcast where she's calling them the doggies now,
Oh, I
which
love
I
her.
think is great. But they went through and the Social Security administration records, and they found a bunch of people who were 150 and collecting Social Security. Well, the 150 is an old coding uh, trick that if you don't know the birth date, it defaults to zero. And the zero is when it goes back 150 years. So that shows up as their age is 150. Well, they know this. Those people who are in there, like checking those records, they're smart enough to know that about and this ancient COBOL computer language. But then they come out and put out a press release and like, oh, people on Social Security, people who are 150-year-old are collecting Social Security, so there has to be fraud, waste, and abuse. When in fact, that's not true. Social Security is one of the best government programs ever created, most efficient, the best run, and really essential for helping the people have a decent um, end of life experience. So the focus then becomes on, oh, 150-year-olds are getting Social Security instead of, wait, they're in there downloading all of that Social Security information about me. And what happens to that? Does that get shared out there as data? Does that compromise security? And one of the things that it's incumbent on the press to, and I think the role of the press in a democracy is to call that out and say, hey, wait a minute, you guys are crazy. This isn't true. Um, and to stop focusing on the trees and look at the forest. One of the difficulties in doing that is that there's so much out there on social media, and people are just not careful consumers of their social media. If they see something online, they tend to immediately believe that it's true instead of saying, wait, whoa, wait a minute. So Facebook becomes like the New York Times. You look at the New York Times and you assume that it's compiled by professional journalists using a set of ethical standards. And then you look at Facebook and you assume the same thing to be true, and it's just not. Um, I'm no longer on X. I find it just really a nasty place. And I just don't want to, I just don't want to be there. A
Yeah.
lot of people I know are still on there. There's a lot of good journalists who share their stories on there, which I miss, but I just don't want to tolerate all the other stuff. And I'm hoping that we've reached a point now with social media where people are getting more sophisticated about it and understanding that it is not a benign or benevolent media provider, that there are all sorts of media inputs in there, and that you have to really look at something and decide for yourself whether it's legit or not. And the best way to understand that is to educate yourself about media. I do have to share one of the things about me is I'm old school, right? Ink stained wretch from way back. I don't read print media anymore except for a few selected magazines. I get all of my media online, digitally. So I subscribe to newspapers and read them there. I have an iPad because the phone's just too small for my old eyes. But the print product isn't what's important in journalism anymore. It is the actual reporting and the journalism that goes on, and that's really available if people want to go to trusted sources. And this whole idea that anything on Facebook is considered a trusted source is just it needs to be stamped out, completely wiped out because it's just not true.
Right. Couldn't agree more. Um, and I want to continue this for a minute because you mentioned Kara Swisher, who I think she's one of my favorite folks to follow right now, especially because she's been in the tech world for so long.
Right,
And we can't deny how important these guys now and how much control they actually have over the world at this point and
right.
information. And one of the interesting things that she continues to kind of touch upon in her coverage of Doge is how much Elon Musk has been fighting to get into the payment space.
Yeah,
And the possibility that he's using this data and he's doing a lot of these weird games and he's got like a Doge coin and then Trump had his meme coin and they're really into the crypto space because he wants to get into payments and he's accessing all these systems to harvest data. um, I don't know that I worry so much that he's going to like hack into my bank account, but I do feel like we should all be really concerned that someone who has clear ambitions that will be benefited by harvesting our data done on our dime. I mean, that's really a problem. And that's kind of where I think what you're saying, quality journalism really matters. Like they're doing all this crazy stuff, but hey, don't forget the Wizard of Oz over here with his
it's
teenage hackers kind of building their next, monopoly off of our backs, right?
right, right.
Um,
And one of the things that is interest, and I totally agree with you about Kara Swisher. She is so plugged into that tech bro community and understands it. She's been doing it for decades. Um, and she really understands the dynamic there. And I think especially for Elon, he has considerable interest in the federal government. He is a federal government contractor, and
yes.
he's been turned loose to do whatever he wants in the federal government, which, by the way, includes a $400 million contract to supply his Tesla trucks
Yep.
as armored vehicles, which I don't
Yeah.
understand how that works. But so he has a financial interest in all of this that
Hmm.
I don't think people concentrate on enough.
Right.
People talk about, oh, they're going to make the Tesla trucks. They sold, but he benefits from that. That $400 million, I don't think he saved $400 million in the federal government, but he's made 400 million, right?
Yeah.
So it's the trucks, it's SpaceX, which has contracts with NASA, which he hopes to, it's Starlink, all of those tech things. Um, I think with Bezos and Amazon, part of the reason he withheld an endorsement editorial at the Washington Post, which he owns, is because he's interested in getting support from the federal government, specifically through the Department of Defense, for his Blue Horizons low orbit Earth satellites, which he will make a ton of money off of.
Yeah.
Um, and if you look at what's been happening in the last 5 years, we went from the richest people in the world being investors like Warren Buffett or somebody who's been there in the long run, like Bill Gates, to Elon, Bezos, Zuckerberg, all of those social media people who are out there who are just churning through stuff. And there's a reason for that. And a large part of the reason for what's happening with them, their wealth gains, are A, the stock market, and B, their federal government contracts and their ability to monopolize markets.
Yeah. I mean, and also, I mean, they've turned all of us into profit centers, right? I mean,
Oh, for
unwittingly,
sure.
you know. And I will say, I left X, I think, during the first Trump administration just because I realized it was a hellscape. And also, I was spending way too much time arguing with people on there, and I was like, I do not have time for this. Um, but I've spent more time on X over the past few weeks than I have in years, simply because there are so many politicians that are still on X and not on Blue Sky or another platform. And now the White House also has like made X their official channel to issue press releases. So it's really crazy how tied in that is. And I think for me, having worked in finance, um, it's so highly regulated, and you're always, having to comply with different regulations and make sure there's no conflicts, et cetera, et cetera. And so many of us in our professional lives are so careful about conflicts and doing what is right and what is ethical, or just
Right.
following compliance guidelines. And these guys are just out there,
I don't
like,
care.
yeah, it's insane.
They do not
Um,
care.
okay, so let's bring
Well,
it back to New. Yeah,
can
go
I
ahead.
just piggyback on that a little bit? One of the other things that's going on that hasn't gotten a lot of attention, and it seems like small potatoes, but I think it's indicative of what's really happening, is
Mhm.
that there have been these. Trump has sued, um, first Facebook and Twitter because they removed him from the site, and they removed him not because they're anti-free speech or because he said something incendiary. They removed him because he violated the service contract, the rules that are in the rules of service in the contract. So then he sues them, and now even Disney did this. Bob Iger at Disney, they paid settlements on these lawsuits where Trump has alleged that he's been defamed, and rather than challenge the lawsuits, they've gone ahead and pay them. And I understand from an executive standpoint that your first responsibility is to protect the board and their profits. But at some point, if you are a media company, you can't tolerate that. Like media companies can't go, yes, we will just pay off the suit because it's cheaper than standing on our principles and arguing principles. So that to me proves that these social media companies are not media companies in the sense that we expect them to be media companies. They are false fronts. They are a way to collect and collate data to bring people
Yep.
together to serve up ads and to make money and to profit. And you can make that argument about newspapers, but traditionally in our country, newspapers have had a higher purpose than that.
Mhm. So having said that, and a lot of what we've talked about here, what are some of your go-to outlets? If people are listening from a national perspective, and then we can get into New Jersey and local media, but I'd
Oh,
love to
sure.
hear your thoughts because I still struggle it with myself, because I used to like a lot of the Vox media publications and the podcasts they put out. And then last week they put out a statement on the AP and the Gulf of Mexico, which you probably saw, and I felt it kind of problematic. So I myself also struggle with, where should I turn? Kara Swisher, someone I paid a lot of attention to. I think Wired has been putting out great content. But who are some of the national outlets you follow and trust?
So I think in addition to Wired and Kara Swisher, and Wired is sort of off and on for me, but I think they're great. The Atlantic does great stuff.
Hmm.
And not just in politics and government, but all over. And always the New Yorker. I've been a New Yorker reader from way back. Um, but I also think my reading diet is widely varied. I will read pretty much anything to see what they're saying. I'll read the Wall Street Journal on the regular. I read the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and the Washington Post, the LA Times, if I can.
Yeah.
Um, and then I read The Guardian from the UK. I like them. They're super progressive and
Mhm.
they're nonprofit. And I like to get sort of the international perspective. Um, but so I try and get as many different outlets as I can. I watch Fox News. Uh, I have a hard time watching the talking head shows on Fox and MSNBC. Um, I love Rachel Maddow. I think she's smart as a whip, but I also think that a lot of what's out there is just each side arguing with each other. And to me,
Yeah.
that's not journalism, right? That's
Yeah.
not what I want in journalism. I'll listen to it occasionally for the opinion parts of it, but it's purely
Mhm.
opinion. It's just back and
Yeah.
forth arguing to build audience. So, I really go to a lot of the mainstream media
Yeah.
for national news.
And you hit on something that I kind of feel as well with like the rage factor. Like if I feel like I'm consuming media that is just telling me stuff I already kind of know, reaffirming my own beliefs and getting me pissed, but then like doesn't leave me feeling like there's anything I could do about it. Like I'm just angry and all riled up. Like I kind of just have to put that to the side. And I always tell
Right.
other people too, like be really intentional about learning and then figuring out what you can do about it.
Right,
And
because
just
media
don't
is supposed to inform you, not make you angry.
Exactly, exactly. And there's a lot of money to be made in anger, in terms of media, and then, political consultants talk about this a lot too, which I have a problem with. Um, but anyway, I want to be mindful of time here, and we still have to talk about New Jersey. So New Jersey, I when I tell people this and when I learned this in grad school, it was really interesting to me because I had never thought of it growing up in New Jersey. But we've got a pretty funky media landscape, which actually has hurt, I think, democracy and transparency in our state. So I'd love to get your take on the media landscape in New Jersey, if you will.
So, I mean, the old Ben Franklin quote, or the sandwich between the middle of two ends of the keg with New York and Philadelphia media markets. And they don't pay particular attention to New Jersey except when there's something scandalous or really unusual. So that leaves a lot of room in between for publications in New Jersey. And New Jersey used to have a really robust and competitive uh, news ecosystem, for lack of a better description. And that's withered away. There's still the Star Ledger, NJ.com now, because the Star Ledger officially doesn't exist anymore as a print product. And
Yeah.
then there's NorthJersey.com, which is a now Gannett owned and several newspapers. NJ.com is also several newspapers. So those are the two main outlets. But there's a lot of new stuff popping up that I think is really innovative and terrific. There's terrific reporting on it. The Monitor has been fantastic.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody out there reads it regularly, but they do some really fantastic reporting, and it's
Right.
it's really solid and meaty and helps you understand what's going on. Um, Terrence, the editor over there, is just fantastic. I think there are a couple of new publications that have popped up. The Jersey Vindicator um, is has just started, and I think they're doing some pretty good stuff. Spotlight NJ, which is
Yep.
now melded with NJN, and I forget their name, NJ Spotlight New Jersey or News, whatever it is
Yeah.
called. But they do really great stuff, and they have
Yeah.
some really talented reporters, and they are really truly a statewide newspaper. They tend to focus on health and environment issues because
Yep.
that's where a lot of the funding is now. But
Okay.
at the same token, they have some really great, competent reporters there. Um, I think in terms of local media, I mean, those are sort of the statewide media. Local media, I think there are some really fantastic local news outlets. Uh, Red Bank Green and where you're at
Yep.
with Brian Donahue has been fantastic. And there's another former Ledger reporter running Morristown Green. There's a bunch of micro sites out there
Hmm.
that I think are really good. Um, so I think there's a lot of news out there to be had. One of the things, if I just pimp myself out a little bit,
Yeah.
New Jersey used to have like when I got here, there were maybe 70 full-time reporters covering state government and politics.
Yep.
And now there are fewer than 2 dozen.
Yeah.
We have fewer reporters at the State House in New Jersey than there are reporters at the State House in Montana. and Helena and Montana. So it's really shriveled up. And one of the things that was frustrating to me is that there wasn't the desire or the finances for anybody to invest in more reporters in the State House. So I decided that without those outlets, and there was no way to train reporters to cover government. So that's I started this thing called the State House News Service, New Jersey State House News Service, where we bring in student journalists who are generally seniors in college and have some experience and teach them how to cover government. Um, and rather than publish it ourselves, because we don't really want to be a publishing platform, we want to be a distribution network. We offered it up to some of these local um, independent news sites for them to use as content for free. Hopefully, at some point, we'll have a relationship where they feel like they can contribute. But it was important to us to have an outlet that was beyond just some website that we created.
Well,
So we produce content every week and share it with the partners that we have. I think we have 20 partners now that represent more than 100 specific sites, one of the big ones being Tap Into. But the idea is that we are teaching journalists how to do this. So we're filling the pipeline of journalists, which is our essential mission. But we're also providing more news to more outlets, and I think that's really an imperative part of what needs to happen in New Jersey with the news ecosystem.
yeah. And actually, there is an interesting trying to tie this back to, politics and its role on democracy in New Jersey and then nationally as well. Um, you know, I read the New Jersey Monitor and I get daily updates. And I can't tell you how many times I've found a great article about something happening in the State House. And there are times where a lot of my friends that are politically engaged in the state, I will shoot it over to them and say, did you know about this bill that's up for a vote? Or did you know this thing that just passed that seems really questionable? And 9 times out of 10, people are like, "Oh, where'd you see this? I had no idea this was happening, but I don't like it." And that's the importance of, what we're talking about
Right,
because, if you don't
right.
have a nightly news that is broadcasting this and you really have to go and search for it, it's tough to figure out what's happening down in Trenton in the Capitol, especially when you have so few reporters doing it. And at the Democratic governor's debate, you probably saw they kind of addressed this question. And a few of the candidates talked about a FOIA bill that came out last year that had some pushback, but it was passed anyway. Um, so I'd love to talk about that just a little further, like some of the important stories happening in Trenton and how they impact us all, and kind of some of the interesting issues that your reporters are focusing on that kind of
Sure.
otherwise wouldn't be widely covered.
Sure. So one hack I have for anybody who's listening is if you
Mhm,
want to keep sort of track of everything instead of going to all the individual websites,
mhm.
most of the no, big news organizations now put out morning newsletters. Politico does one, Monitor does one, NJ.com does one, and that for me is there's also one of the community the Center for uh, Cooperative Media at Montclair State puts out one. And those are sort of an aggregation of everything that's out there. And it's easier for me just to read those than to
Yep.
go through to the individual sites. So, especially on the local level. But to get back to the question about what's out there. So, there is one of the things there's a couple of things going on in the state that are very interesting. The challenge to the ballot position and the ballot line was really a repudiation of boss politics in New Jersey. And whatever else you think about Andy Kim, he was successful in pushing that forward and addressing that. And there was a lot of support among the media for dealing with that and an explanation for people of why this is important that I think has really helped people understand that uh, as long as there's a ballot line and there's a group of candidates that are endorsed by whoever is in charge of that county, we are going to have political bosses. So that is rapidly shifting. I think Thursday in in the Senate Judiciary Committee, I believe they're hearing legislation to revamp the ballot format so that and which I think is a big bill in terms of the impact it has on local folks and who's running. So that's out there. That's important. You have Ras Baraka campaigning for governor saying, get rid of the bosses. He was just out last night saying, we got to get rid of the bosses. And I think there are a lot of folks out there who are jumping into that pool.
Yep.
The other thing that's been going on in Trenton, sort of sub rosa, is this attack on transparency and accountability. You mentioned the gutting of the Open Public Records Act earlier this year. Sorry, last year. They really gutted that. First of all, it was bad enough. The Oprah was bad enough in New Jersey because it didn't include the legislature or the judiciary. So it only included the executive branch. And then they went and made a couple of significant changes, including not making compensation for attorneys who challenged these Oprah denials uh, uh, optional. The judge may award instead of shall award those attorney fees, which for a lot of news organizations is important because you don't have the wherewithal to hire attorneys. But beyond that, there's a bunch of other things that are going on. ELEC was gutted before Oprah, the Election Law Enforcement Commission, which is where you report donations for campaigns and lobbying activity and those sorts of things. And today, as we speak, or maybe a little earlier than what we're speaking, the state uh, joint management commission, which oversees the running of the state house, is considering these new policies. And they did not put the policies out in advance. They're voting on them today after an executive session that would change the requirements for being admitted to the state house, what sort of um, for general citizens, not just reporters, what sort of identification you need, how that works. And then they're going to add, they're buying a system for retinal scanning. So there are eye scans to gain access to parts of the state house, which nobody's written about. Hopefully we'll have a story about that later this afternoon. But it's just outrageous that these
Yeah.
sorts of things are going on and they're unchallenged. And, the commission put out a press release. Late Thursday afternoon to notice of the meeting, and it's an agenda that says we're going to do this, 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 and purchase retinal eye scan technology. I forget what it's called, what the proprietary name is. But when I called them up and said, "Hey, can I see all of the documentation for this, the policy that you're considering, what the language is?" I was told it's not available, and it won't be available until the meeting. So ahead of the meeting, nobody had a chance to look at it or even consider it, but they'll get it at the meeting after the commission takes action on it. And, that kind of behavior should not be acceptable at all. And if we had a more robust State House press corps, I don't think it would happen. Um,
Yeah.
you know, they put it out Thursday after all the committee hearings were done. I happened to be in the press room late. Nobody was in on Friday, so they successfully followed the notice without actually telling anybody what was going on. They dropped paper off in the press room. So, there's also some legislation going on about um, uh, advertising, government notice advertising, and whenever there's requests for bids put out, that they're supposed to advertise these in local newspapers or national or
Yeah.
state newspapers. Um, because newspapers don't really exist anymore, they're now switching it over to digital media, but they get to now are going to make a choice about who they can give it to, and they can give it to whoever they want as a reward of local media of like, oh, we'll run our notice and we'll pay you $1,000.
Yep.
So that becomes a sort of a quid. It can become sort of a quid pro quo that we have to watch out for. And those are some of the things that are going on. I think there's a real attack on accountability and transparency at the State House right now.
Yeah, I mean, you brought up so many things there that I appreciate you articulating in your professional capacity, right? Because this is kind of what you do.
Right.
Um, and it's funny because for me as a citizen and as a troublemaker by design at this point, there are times where I catch wind of these things. Um, and it's just shocking to me how out of the norm this behavior really is. You brought up the bill on our ballot redesign. And one of the things that I learned in, just following some of the coverage on this was
there's like this component where people can have slogans on the ballot, and it seemed like
Right.
there were folks trying to game the slogans a little bit. Um, and I asked someone who's an expert on this, I said, how many other states have slogans in their ballots? And they were like, one state, it's California, and they have very, very strict regulations on actually how those slogans can look and
Right.
what they can say. Um, so we're getting rid of the line, but now we've got this other thing. And, someone tried to tell me, in Trenton, someone tried to tell me that, oh, no, no, we're not the only ones. I said, well, we are. Like, that is a demonstrable fact, that's being completely left out of this debate. And why are we the only state? So I would imagine with some of the provisions you discussed in that bill that's introduced now with the retinal scanning, I mean, I'd love to know, and talk to an advocate who could kind of give us some substantive facts about what other state houses do and if this is standard practice or not. And if it's not, why? Why were we doing it?
Right. Well, and what's the need for this super secure environment that they're talking
Yeah.
about? Why is there a need for that? This is the people's house. It used to be when I started out here, you didn't even have to go. I mean, you didn't have to go through a metal detector. You walked in the front doors and you could roam the halls at will. But now it's completely clamped down. If you don't have ID and get a registered sticker to get in there or a building pass that the governor's office issues, you can't get in, or you have to. There are all sorts of provisions for it, and it's really I don't understand why there's a clampdown on the security. I think it's unnecessary in large measure, and beyond the what it does for the press, because I think the press can work around these things. We
Uh,
have press passes to get in there. We can get around and easily enough. But what this does is limit people getting into the state house.
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
it makes it harder for the average citizen to go and listen to a committee hearing if they are interested in it, or to go and knock on the door of their elected representative's office and say, "Hey, I have a bone to pick with you." Like you just can't do that anymore, and it's really it's expensive, but more important than that, it is anti-democratic,
Yeah.
flat
Well,
out.
and that's another thing is that um, there's so many issues that we want tackled. We talk about taxes all day and what needs to be reformed. And yet they take on these measures that you really have to question what the motivation is.
Yeah,
Another similar bill that I came across recently was um, they re just a few weeks ago increased the number of signatures you need to get on the
right,
ballot
right.
because they don't want superfluous candidates in the races. I'm like, last time I
Superfluous candidates.
last time I checked, I don't have 10 people knocking on my door every time there's an assembly race. I don't know why this is such a big problem and why we needed a specific bill about it. But that's just another example of,
Well, and let me go back to what you were talking about the ballot slogans. One of the things about ballot slogans is this isn't just a shorthand way to describe somebody's political beliefs. This is coded language to say I'm with this group or I'm
yeah,
not with that group. And that's the problem with it, really. And
yeah,
nobody needs to know those ballot slogans, what it's the regular Democratic Committee. Well, what does that mean? That means the regular Democratic Committee. Well, that's part of the boss group, right?
yeah,
So little things like that amount to bigger things. And I think just the sheer volume of changes that are going on, those small changes that are happening, tend toward a lack of transparency. And if there's going to be no ballot line, there are going to be other ways to control who's on the ballot, and signatures is one way to do that. Slogans is another way to do that.
yeah. And when you think about the national conversation, where you have so many people, and pundits talking about how, the election results in November and this trending towards authoritarianism and populism is born of a distrust of institutions. Well, like this is kind of where the rubber meets the road on all that,
Right,
right?
right.
Um, so, so I guess like let's get back to what people can do. So you talked about New Jersey Monitor and New Jersey Spotlight, and those for folks that are not in New Jersey, New Jersey Monitor, if I'm not mistaken, they're part of a collective, a
Right.
national collective, like states. So if folks are in other states, what is the organization, or are you familiar with kind of how that
I
works?
I forget, but they're part of a national network.
Okay.
So it's the same network that has a lot of state house programs. I forget what it's called. The state house. journalism program. I forget exactly what it's
Something.
called, but there are in many states, as is the State House News Service. So we're part of a
Mhm.
group of university-led programs in 20 states where college students
Awesome.
are in the State House doing that. But they're independent in
Yep.
terms of that. So that's good.
Awesome.
There are a lot of programs, national programs that support them. Report for America is one of them. There are a bunch of nonprofit foundations that donate to them. But
Awesome.
I think one of the things about that's great about them, and here's what people can do. Go subscribe to their newsletters, right? So the newsletters are generally free. You can go and
Yep.
subscribe to their newsletter and get that synopsis. And if you hit a paywall with some of the aggregated content, that's fine. But subscribe to those newsletters, get them every week, see what's going on. And then my personal goal is to subscribe to the newspapers, the news organizations I read, the media organizations I read. So if I'm reading NJ.com, I'm paying them a subscription because that's how they survive. If I
Right.
am reading Spotlight NJ, I'm going to make a contribution. The same way that National Public Radio works, the
Yep.
same model. But if you're willing to go and pay $6 for a coffee or a latte at Starbucks, on the regular, why aren't you willing to pay $6 for a monthly subscription to a local news organization? A, you'll get news, which is great,
Yep.
and B, it helps support them. And I think little by little, if we make that standard practice, then that's helpful to not only to us but to the news organizations. And one of the things that's happened with social media, if I can just climb a little higher on my soapbox, is that the social media has created an expectation that news is free. So they will publish whatever they want as news, and people will go, "Oh, it's news. It's on social media. It's free. Why should I pay for it?" Well, you get what you pay for, right?
Yeah.
The crap that's on social media is crap.
Hmm.
And you're not going to get quality journalism unless you're willing to support quality journalism. And it's not expensive at all. It's in I probably spend I don't know, I've tracked it at one point. I probably spend $300 or $400 a month or a year, sorry, on media subscriptions, including magazines and other things. So it's not a huge amount of money. And I have a larger appetite for media than most people do. So I subscribe to a lot of things.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And a few of the outlets I support are 501(c)(3)s. So
Mhm.
come tax time, I've actually got some deductions for
Sure.
those services. And you don't get really annoying pop-up ads in your face when you're reading these stories, which also
Absolutely.
gets back to you get what you pay for. You get good information and you're not getting really annoying because they're going to make money off of you some way. So you might as well pay for good information, um, and just pick your top few, some like ones that really speak to you. Um, and yeah, I think that's a great note to end it on.
Sure.
I couldn't say it better myself. And anytime you want to get up on your soapbox, you have a home here because I'm always here for it. And I truly appreciate your time and everything you're doing. What are some of the publications here in New Jersey that folks can subscribe to or visit to see some of your work if they want to support the state's newsroom
Well,
specifically?
you can. So this is a good question. You can. I don't do the work myself, but my students do. You can get them. The Times of Trenton is a regular publisher of ours. The Press of Atlantic City is a pretty consistent partner. The Planet Princeton, the up in Morris County, the Morristown Green. Uh, Now Brian at Red Bank Green is getting involved. So, and we're trying to provide enough content from them for them that we can keep those things going on.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time and everyone listening. Please take a few minutes after this podcast if it resonated with you to check out your local state news coverage. If you have a local PBS affiliate or an affiliate with the State Newsroom Collective or a student, run organization similar to what Deb's doing here, these are great sources. And as Deb said, these folks definitely will benefit if you're able to pay for a subscription or at the very least sign up for newsletters and really get their reader rate up. So thank you so much, Deb. Thanks
My
for everything
pleasure.
you're doing. And I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Okay, Nicole. Talk to you.
Okay.